Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm Bob Clay and welcome to Alaska Weather. Let's move right into the show here. We have two advisories in effect right now. We have a flood advisory remains in effect till 10:15 a.m. Monday morning for the, from Kenai Lake to the mouth of the Kasilof River near Tussamina Lake. And then what I don't have on here is the small stream and urban flood advisory for the Taiya River near Skagway, and also the Montana and Jordan Creeks near Juneau, and that's in effect until 6 p.m. Monday morning. Let's take a look here at the satellite imagery. Oop, there we go. And we'll set this in motion. You can kind of see what's going on here. We've got a low pressure center which is over near Bristol Bay, and you can see the frontal system which is kind of worked its way through. I should say, didn't really work its way through. Most of the clouds kind of pushed through, but it's kind of hung up along the North Gulf Coast. And then there's another wave which is developing further south here along this front. And we'll kind of set this in motion one more time here. And you'll be able to see, whoop, there we go, the frontal system kind of moving north there, kind of hanging up along the coast here. And you've got a couple waves here, one and one there. And then we'll also going to be seeing increasing clouds moving into southeast Alaska throughout the evening. Now let's take a look at our visible satellite picture. This is what you would see with the naked eye looking out the window, but you can see that there's quite a few breaks over southeast Alaska today. Also over in the central interior, just on Fairbanks north up, just south of the Brooks Range there. A few breaks over in southwest Alaska there. And for the most part, you can see cloudy conditions over most of the Bering Sea. And I'll just kind of set this in motion one more time there. And there's quite a few low clouds which are over the Bering Sea, but eventually we're going to start to see those increase with time as we move over for the next day or so, as a high pressure ridge kind of moves into the area. Okay, let's see. There we go. All right. So this is today's weather map, and we basically just looked at the satellite, but you can see now just throwing the frontal systems on here, the secluded front and the cold front kind of shifting south. And a pretty good warm sector moving up, bringing a lot of rain into southeast Alaska over the next 24 hours or so, and rain continuing up along the North Gulf Coast. So this is today's snapshot, and we saw the breaks there on the satellite picture there, and we've got a trough of low pressure which along the northwest portions of the Brooks Range this afternoon we had some thunderstorms, and also some thunderstorms just off the coast, just southeast of St. Lawrence Island. And over in the Bristol Bay area, you can see the showers associated with that low pressure center. And then further out west, we've got a high pressure ridge kind of over the central Bering Sea, and generally some fog and some drizzle out in that area. And then just a very weak low pressure center with a trough out over towards the Attu area, and that'll be slowly moving east over the next 24 to 48 hours or so. Okay, for tonight's forecast, we'll see it moves some, with maybe the light rain or some rain showers associated with that. Ridge of high pressure kind of moves over towards the central portion of the Bering Sea. So we'll see quite a bit of fog associated with that, especially over towards the Pribs. They'll be most likely the ones showing that. And again, any ships out there should receive a lot of low clouds and fog associated with that. We'll have an onshore flow over towards the Alaska Peninsula, so we'll see some rain showers and maybe a little fog out that way. Now, basically, we'll have a low pressure trough kind of extending over most of the state, but it seems like the most unstable area, there's a big area of cold air aloft, which is kind of going to be hunkering like over in western Alaska over the next day or so. And what will happen is the most unstable air will be probably over the western half of the state there, or I should say west of the Alaska Range. So we'll see some thunderstorm activity throughout the evening hours tonight over in southwest Alaska, and even up towards the Seward Peninsula and all along the Brooks Range. And again, that should die down overnight as things start to cool off again overnight. And then over in the Gulf of Alaska there, we'll see that front just kind of hangs up along the coast there. This wave we were looking at in satellite imagery now is going to be shifting over towards the northeast, and that will be bringing the fire hose kind of pointed right over towards southeast Alaska. And it should get a lot of rain over here next day or two. And then on the backside, we'll see a few showers over towards Kodiak Island. Now, let's take a look at our forecast for Sunday. And Sunday, that onshore flow pretty much continues. The rain will continue over southeast Alaska. And then we'll also see rain kind of moving into the Copper River Basin with a kind of that southeasterly flow aloft. And rain probably in the half of the, I would say the eastern half of the North Gulf Coast throughout the afternoon hours tomorrow. We'll see a few breaks with some showers over in the remainder of South Central over to the Cook Inlet area and also the Susitna Valleys. And we'll see a large area of showers and also thunderstorms over the eastern half of the state there with that cold air aloft and that thermal trough. And the thunderstorms will even extend all the way up into the Brooks Range. You may even see a few sneak up over the Brooks Range, but I think for the most part, the northern extent will be along the Brooks Range associated with those thunderstorms. A few showers over in Bristol Bay and also a few showers along the Alaska Peninsula. We'll see the ridge-of-high pressure, a lot of low clouds kind of continuing over in the central portion of the Bering Sea, and we'll have little light rain showers, there's a little light rain associated with that trough kind of moving in to the western Aleutians. And as we move towards Monday's forecast, generally we'll see that first one kind of moves over here and kind of weakens, and we get another one which works its way out of the North Pacific, and that's going to bring a little light rain probably to the western Aleutians as we move in to the afternoon hours on Monday. And meanwhile, this high pressure center now has moved further east, and it's going to spread more and more low clouds and fog over into the Bristol Bay areas, and particularly along the coastal areas of most of southwest and western Alaska. You know, the air will become a little bit more stable as it starts to warm aloft. So we'll see probably just showers over the western half. However, there's a thermal trough still pretty far north over the northeast northeast tier of the state there. And we'll see thunderstorms, particularly up in the upper Yukon valleys, and still probably, I think, over the eastern and central portions of the Brooks Range. And some thunderstorm activity probably over in the Copper River Basin along the Alaska Range there, and then, of course, over the Yukon Territory. And then over in the Gulf, what's going to happen is that front's going to kind of move inland and then kind of break up a little bit. And so what's going to happen, I think, we'll see some ridging developing, and we'll start to see some low clouds and fog probably developing over in southeast Alaska. I didn't put those symbols on there, but I just can imagine you'll be looking at a little low clouds and fog and a little drizzle. And I think probably late in the day, you'll probably start to see maybe a few breaks or so. And now let's take a look. Woo, there we go. Oh, it's not going to go. There we go. Okay, these are temperatures around the state as of 3 p.m. this afternoon. You see 50s and 60s over in southeast Alaska, some 50s along the coastal areas, a little bit warmer inland with few cloud breaks over in the Cook Inlet area and the Susitna Valley. We were in the 60s for the most part, and at Kodiak Island about 59 or so. Let's move a little bit further north now. There we go. All right, and we're basically 60s for the most part over the central interior. As you can see where the breaks were in the interior areas. A lot cooler as you get up along the Arctic coast there and Beaufort Sea coast in the 40s for the most part. Some 60s over towards Nome, some 50s, 60-degree readings over in southwest Alaska. Along the Alaska Peninsula, generally on the southern side, we're about in the 60s and the 50s on the northern side, 50s over towards the Pribilof Islands, and for the most part, 50s over along most of the remainder of the Aleutian Islands. All right, now for tonight's low temperature readings, we're going to be expecting 50s over in southeast Alaska, 40s to 50s along the North Gulf Coast. We'll see some 40s in the Copper River Basin, 40s on large portions of the interior sections, and we'll see a few upper 30s up towards the Barrow area, 40s otherwise along the Arctic coast. We'll see 50s and 40s over southwest Alaska, 50s along the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the Aleutians and the Pribilof Islands. Now for tomorrow's high temperatures, 50s for the most part, continuing over the Pribilofs and the Aleutian Islands, 50s to 60s over Alaska Peninsula. We'll see 60s in southwest Alaska, 60s to 70s as you get further north up towards the upper Yukon Valley. And we'll see even some 60s just north of the Brooks Range there as that thermal trough kind of strengthens a little bit. And along the North Gulf Coast, we'll see generally 50s, 60s over in south central, and we'll see generally 50s for the most part as that rain moves into southeast Alaska tomorrow. All right, and now for our, there we go, we got to push the button harder. Um, so basically it's our flying weather, and as you can tell, basically with that southwest flow and those front moving up towards the coast there, we're going to see widespread IFR conditions over most of southeast Alaska, as well as along the North Gulf Coast. We'll see a few breaks, at least in the marginal VFR category in the lower elevations in the Cop River Basin, as well as over in the Cook Inlet area, but along the Alaska Range there, west of the Cook Inlet area, we'll be looking for this IFR conditions. Probably widespread marginal VFR. I didn't want to paint it too pessimistically, but we'll see quite a bit of shower activity over the western half of the state. So I think probably for the most part, a few breaks, but predominantly we'll see some marginal VFR conditions as well along the Brooks Range. And the Brooks Range could even see a little bit of IFR conditions in the thunderstorms developing. IFR conditions with some lower clouds up along the Arctic coast expected for tomorrow. And as we get over towards the eastern portion of the Bering Sea, a lot of low clouds and fog, so we'll look for widespread IFR conditions. And you know what? I've got this marginal VFR conditions extending a little bit on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, but I'm thinking it's probably going to be more on the northern side of the peninsula and not so much on the Pacific side. So just kind of ignore that part. And then over most of the Aleutians, look for some IFR conditions with the ridge of high pressure kind of moving into that area. Okay, let's look at our flying weather around the state. And at Tuvik and Adigan, we're going to be looking at marginal VFR conditions. May see a little IFR conditions with thunderstorm development. Adigan will be pretty much about the same. Now moving along the Alaska Range. Lake Clark and Merrill, I'm thinking we're going to see some marginal VFR to IFR conditions and shower activity over there throughout most of the day tomorrow. As we move towards Rainy Pass, I think we'll probably see predominantly IFR. There'll probably maybe a little marginal VFR mixed in there. It's pretty much the same thing at Windy. Isabel and Mantasta, I'm thinking we're going to be looking at some marginal VFR, IFR conditions and shower, and then particularly rain kind of moving in. And Tanita, I think marginal VFR probably is going to cover it through most of the day tomorrow. And then as we get along Portage, with that onshore flow, with that front moving up, we'll be looking at IFR conditions. And of course, Chilkoot and Wide Pass, with all that moisture kicking up there, look for some IFR conditions. Now, these are the freezing levels around the state, and generally, well, you don't see the surface because that's way north, but generally you got a large area, about 8,000 feet over the central portion of the mainland, up to about 12,000 feet as you get down towards Haida Gwaii there, 10,000 feet over the western portion of Alaska Peninsula, about 8,000 feet over the Aleutians. And now let's look at our icing. Well, hopefully it's not too complicated, but basically in this large red area here, or orange area, we're going to be looking for some, moderate icing, and below 20,000 feet, and that's going to be, and a lot of it on the wholesale variety or widespread stuff will be in southeast Alaska along the North Gulf Coast with that strong onshore flow associated with the front. And then as you get over the western and the mainland areas, generally you're going to be looking at more sporadic or not I'll say widespread, but hit or miss, simply because it'll be more convective or shower activity in those areas. And then this blue area here, you could even see some isolated severe in there associated with the thunderstorm activity. Okay. All right, now jet stream aloft. Okay, you can see basically extending from Japan there all the way over to the southeast Alaska. Pretty good jet, about 90 knots off to the west there, and bumping up to 110 knots as it goes across the Pacific there. It'll actually drop south at about as far south as about 40 north. So that's a pretty good stretch there, and a good moisture source for that rain moving into southeast Alaska. And then now at 9,000 feet, generally you've got a trough kind of extending over the state. And that's a cold air associated with that trough there. It's going to produce a lot of the convection that we're expecting over the mainland areas. We've got another weak low pressure center kind of over the Gulf there, and this is at 9,000 feet. You can see that onshore southwesterly flow, 30 to 40 knots over the Gulf there. And at 3,000 feet, pretty much about the same, a little bit weaker, but 35 to 40 knots or so. The west to southwest kind of moving into southeast Alaska. Upper trough, pretty much reflection of that just continues all the way down to 3,000 feet. You can see the reflection of the ridge, which is going to bring a lot of that low clouds and stratus and fog over into the Bering Sea, and also over towards southwest Alaska as you move in towards Mundy, and that trough off to the west there associated with that weak surface center there. All right, so what are we going to have now for our turbulence? Generally, I think we're going to have some pretty gusty winds through the channeled areas, so a lot of turbulence. I said 10,000 feet, but I think a lot of it will probably be below about 3,000 feet, but I can't discount there'll be some higher turbulence through there. And then, of course, with thunderstorm activity and shower activity, we'll probably see some isolated severe and certainly some widespread moderate turbulence with those showers and thunderstorms. Well, that concludes this portion of the show. We'll see you next with the marine section.
Each year, millions of outdoor enthusiasts get a jump start on the boating season. For fishermen, hikers, campers, and other recreationists, the first few days of spring-like weather are the signal that it's time to launch their boats on a favorite lake, stream, or river. Whether a canoe, a john boat, skiff, car topper, or other small craft, these boaters tend to think more about the size of the fish in the lake than about being safe boaters. And all too often, this all-too-casual approach can lead to tragic consequences. After a long winter, it was exactly the kind of day that Jake McDermott and Rudy Bellows were waiting for. A chance to get back out on the lake, break out the rods and a few beers. Maybe even catch a fish or two. Jake McDermott, 43, father of two, the service manager at a local car dealer. His high school friend and fishing partner, Rudy Bellows, a 35-year-old bachelor and a sales manager for an auto parts distributor. Around noon, they paddled out toward the middle of the lake to try their luck at a favorite spot. The air was warming up, but the water temperature was still around 50 degrees. Jake knew the fish held close to the submerged tree and ended up snagging his lure on one of the branches. One last good tug, and he might pull it free. According to Bellows' statement to the police, when Jake first fell in, he didn't think it was a serious situation. But after a few seconds, he realized that his friend was floundering and needed help, fast. But when he lost his balance and fell in, he told us he was immediately disoriented and could barely stay afloat. In the end, it was all he could do to save himself. Jake McDermott drowned just a few yards from his capsized boat in about 8 feet of water. A tragic accident? Of course, they always are. But a freak accident? Far from it. In fact, everything about Jake McDermott's drowning, from where it happened to what caused it, is typical of the vast majority of fatal boating accidents that happen every year. If that sounds surprising, well, that's part of the problem. You see, contrary to popular belief, the typical accident doesn't involve a large offshore boat floundering in high seas and gale force winds. The circumstances in which most fatal accidents occur are far less dramatic. Instead of big water, the typical accident happens inland, on lakes and rivers, the small ponds and streams. And in more cases than not, it's the non-traditional boater who's involved. Fishermen, hunters, campers, people who are likely to be on the water in the spring or the fall months. And usually it's small boats, 16 feet or less, either with no motor or one of 10 horsepower or less. Almost half of all boating fatalities happen in broad daylight and in flat, calm conditions. And most of the time, the boat isn't even underway. Thanks, Jim. Of course, no two boating accidents are exactly alike, but in all too many cases, the common denominator is alcohol. In fact, 60% of all boating deaths are somehow alcohol-related. Part of the problem is that drinking while boating is almost a tradition. The one item you can bet will be on board is a cooler full of beer. But when out in a boat, the alcohol in just 2 or 3 drinks can significantly affect your balance, your vision, your judgment, and your ability to react quickly in case of an emergency. And don't for a minute fall for the myth that beer or wine is any less intoxicating than hard liquor. A can of beer or a glass of wine contain the same amount of alcohol as a shot of whiskey. It doesn't take much alcohol to affect your coordination, and even the slightest sense of unsteadiness can transform small boats like these into highly unstable and dangerous platforms. Under no circumstances should a boat be overloaded or overpowered, and a small boat is no place to stand up. If you have to change positions, keep a low profile and keep your weight centered toward the middle of the boat. Falling out of a boat is always an embarrassing and very often an unpleasant experience. But for the boater who's been drinking, an unexpected plunge could prove deadly. It may be hard to believe, but the inebriated person whose head is underwater can become so disoriented as to swim downward to their death rather than to the surface and safety. You know, the real tragedy of practically every boating-related drowning is that it could have been easily prevented. Wearing a personal flotation device, a PFD, is by far the single most important safety measure you can take when boating. It's a point we've been stressing for years and one that simply cannot be overemphasized. Look at it this way. Virtually every single boating-related drowning could be eliminated if the victim had been wearing a PFD. It's a time of the year when most boats have long since been hauled out of the water. But for more than 2 million waterfowlers in North America, it's the start of their boating season. Some may use a duck boat to head out to a water blind. For others, their boat may be nothing more than a dinghy used to set out decoys. In either case, these boaters operate in one of the most hostile boating environments of all, near freezing water.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the marine forecast. Start over towards southeast Alaska for tomorrow. And the outside waters look for generally southerly winds at 20 knots with seas 11 to 12 feet or so. The inside waters, pretty gusty winds there, starting from the southern inside waters, southeasterly winds 30 knots with seas 6 feet, and 25 knots in the central sections. And then as you get to Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay, look for southerly winds 30 knots with seas to 6 feet. Now for Monday's forecast, we'll be looking for the wind directions to change in the central and the southern sections, about 15 knots to 3-foot seas, but southerly winds continue at about 25 knots with 5-foot seas in Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay. And now the flow also changes a little bit, or actually quite a bit, along the coastal areas. Look for the southern outside waters and central sections. We look for westerly winds 15 knots with seas to 8 feet. The northern sections look for westerly winds 20 knots with 9-foot seas, and the eastern Gulf southwesterly winds 15 knots with a 9-foot swell. Now for south central for tomorrow, we're basically looking for Cape Suckling to Cape Clear. Look for southeasterly winds 20 knots with 10-foot seas, and Cape Clear to Gore Point. Look for variable winds 10 knots with 7-foot seas. As you get out towards the eastern portion of the Barren Islands, westerly winds 15 knots with 8-foot seas. Light variable winds for the most part west of the Barren Islands, near waters near Kodiak Island, westerly winds 20 knots with 9-foot seas. Shelikof Strait, westerly winds 20 knots with 5-foot seas. And as we get up towards the Cook Inlet area, we're looking for northerly winds 15 knots with 3-foot seas. And now moving towards Monday's forecast, Cook Inlet now will be more or less a southerly flow, about 10 knots, and waters west of the Barren Islands. We look for variable winds still, westerly winds in the Shelikof Strait, 15 knots with 5-foot seas, as well as the Kodiak Island area. And we look for the waters southeast of the Barren Islands, as well as Cape Clear to Gore Point, westerly winds 20 knots with 8-foot seas. And from Cape Suckling to Cape Clear, 15 knots southeasterly winds, 7-foot seas, and Prince William Sound, light and variable winds. All right, now for the Alaska Peninsula, we'll start in the southern side here, and we'll look for westerly winds on both the east and the west with seas 8 to 9 feet with 20-knot winds. And then as you get north of the Alaska Peninsula all the way into Bristol Bay, look for westerly winds 20 knots with seas 6 to 7 feet. And for Monday's forecast, pretty much westerly winds continuing in all areas, winds 15 to 20 knots and seas anywhere from 6 to 7 feet or so. All right, now for the Aleutians, and boy, do we have a lot of these. So we're basically looking at, I guess let's take it from the northern, from Adak essentially along the Bering Sea side. Look for westerly winds, 15 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. And then in the southern section, except for the waters near south of Acta there, look for southerly winds at 15 knots. But other than that, to the east of that, look for variable winds 10 knots with 5 foot seas. And as you get in towards the central sections here, look for southerly winds 15 knots with 4 foot seas. And the far west there, westerly winds 20 knots with 6 foot seas. And now for Monday's forecast, pretty much southerly winds, 15 to 20 knots, most areas, light and variable winds as you get over south in the Kiski there, as well as south of Unalaska and just to the north of Unalaska, and with 5 foot seas in those areas. Okay, now for the eastern portion of the Bering Sea, starting from the Pribilof Islands, look for westerly winds 20 knots with 5 foot seas, as well as south of the Nunivak Island, and then north of Nunivak Island, look for northwesterly winds 15 knots with 4 foot seas. St. Matthew Island waters, basically westerly winds 4 foot sea, westerly winds 15 knots with 4 foot seas. And over near St. Lawrence Island, look for northerly winds 15 knots with 3 foot seas. And for Monday's forecast, pretty much in the eastern sections, look for westerly winds 20 knots with seas 4 to 5 feet. Near the Pribilof Islands, southerly winds 15 knots with 4 foot seas, as well as St. Matthew Island waters. And continuing north there we go, we'll be looking generally for northerly winds in Wales to Cape Thompson. And as you get over the strongest winds, pretty much over the central and the eastern portion of the slope there, 20 knot winds at 6 to 8 foot seas. And on Monday, we'll be looking for the far eastern portion of the Beaufort Sea coast there, 20 knots out of the east, northerly winds in the central sections, and light and variable winds for the most part for the remainder of the Arctic coast. Real quick wrap up, we've got a low pressure center bringing a lot of moisture up into southeast Alaska along the coastal areas. We'll see showers and thunderstorms mainly this evening hours. A ridge of high pressure moving in from the west there. And then basically tomorrow we'll see widespread showers and some thunderstorm activity with a cold upper low moving into that area. We'll see rain continue along southeast Alaska and along the North Gulf Coast, and then a ridge of high pressure out west. And as we move in towards Monday's forecast, we'll see quite a few more breaks over the mainland areas, but still some showers, thunderstorm activity expected. A few breaks over southeast. That's all for tonight. Good night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.